Hebrews 11 verse 35b to 38. Faith beyond deliverance. Others were tortured, refusing to accept release, in order to obtain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death, they were sawn in two, they were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, and in caves and holes in the ground. Faith is not only triumphant in victory, but steadfast in suffering. The chapter turns from conquered kingdoms and quenched fire to torture, chains, exile, and death. Yet this is not a lesser faith. It is the same saving faith, now revealed in its holy endurance when relief is refused and the cost of obedience becomes severe. The movement is deliberate. First, faith received what God promised. Now faith refuses what the world offers. First, faith obtained. Now faith relinquishes. First, faith conquered. Now faith endures. It is the same living principle brought under another form of trial. Hebrews 11 verse 35b to 38 shows that saving faith refuses temporal deliverance, endures violent suffering, and outlives the world's rejection because it is anchored in the better resurrection and the better country secured by Christ. First, faith refuses temporal deliverance. Others were tortured, refusing to accept release, in order to obtain a better resurrection. The word, etumpanasthesan, points to brutal public torment. This is not mild opposition, but suffering sharpened into spectacle. Yet the wonder of the verse lies not merely in the torment. It lies in the refusal. A release was offered. The agony could have ceased. Life could have been spared. But the price of that deliverance was disloyalty to God, truth denied, compromise embraced, obedience surrendered. They would not accept it. Not because they made light of life, but because they prized God above life. Not because pain was small, but because the promise of God was weightier. The text tells us why. They sought, kratonos anastasios, a better resurrection. The women in verse 35a received their children back to temporal life, a beautiful and merciful gift, but only temporary. Those children would die again. Here, the saints look beyond such provisional mercies to something final and incorruptible. They refused the lesser because, by grace, faith had persuaded them of the greater. This is the secret strength of suffering faith. Not bare resolve, not stoic hardness. It is the soul governed by final reality, taught by God to count earthly safety a passing thing and the coming resurrection a substantial inheritance. And even here the light falls on Christ. He too refused the easier path. He too endured anguish for the joy set before him. These sufferers walk, however faintly, in the train of their Lord. Their suffering faith is Christ-shaped faith. Second, faith endures violent suffering. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death, they were sawn in two, they were killed by the sword. The writer draws no veil across the cost of faithfulness. The list descends with terrible force: mocking, flogging, bonds, prison, stones, saws, swords, shame, pain, confinement, execution. The same faith that once seemed clothed in triumph now stands exposed to the world's malice. Notice the order. First mockery, then flogging, then bonds. Reputation is wounded before the body. Holiness is made to appear ridiculous before flesh is torn. The world often begins with derision, for if shame can bend the saint, severer violence need not follow. But where faith stands fast, suffering deepens. Chains and imprisonment add another sorrow. Pain bruises the body. Prison contracts the world. The righteous are numbered among criminals. Here faith appears not as the power that always opens prison doors, but as the grace that keeps the heart loyal to God when the doors remain shut. The writer is not indulging historical curiosity. His burden is theological and pastoral, to show that the efficacy of faith is proved not only by conquest, but by patient endurance unto death. Faith is as real in the saint who dies under stones as in the saint who escapes the sword. Heaven does not measure faith by visible outcomes, but by steadfast cleaving to God and his promise. And suffering is never merely outward. The inward trial may be sharper than the lash. The temptation to apostatize may cut deeper than the sword. the whisper of compromise, the offer of relief, the subtle bargain. Yield a little, soften a little, conceal a little, and this affliction may pass. Faith must resist not only pain, but the seduction of self-preservation when self-preservation demands unfaithfulness. What sustains such endurance? Not natural firmness, not human willpower. It is the invisible word of God apprehended as more substantial than the visible instruments of death. The body may be broken, but the promise is not. The flesh may fail, but the covenant stands. And under the brighter light of the new covenant, we may say more still, such faith is wrought and sustained by God Himself. The sufferers of Hebrews 11 were upheld by covenant grace. The same Christ who purchased the better resurrection for them now, as the great high priest, preserves His people in the path of obedience. Faith does not make pain unreal. It makes God supreme. Third, faith outlives the world's rejection. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, and in caves and holes in the ground. Here the writer shows not merely the instant of death, but the long, bleak landscape of rejection. These saints are fugitives, rough skins, not robes of honor. Deserts, mountains, caves, and holes in the ground instead of settled homes and public esteem. Outwardly they appear defeated, thrust to the margins of human society. The verb, plenomenoi, carries the sense of those deprived of fixed earthly dwelling. For God's sake, they become pilgrims under duress, dispossessed in the world, though never forsaken by God. Then comes the divine interruption, the judicial reversal, of whom the world was not worthy. The world rejected them as unfit to remain within it. God pronounces the opposite. The matter was never that they were unworthy of the world, but that the world was unworthy of them. Here is heaven's sentence upon earth's arrogance. The world imagined itself enthroned in judgment over them. In truth, its rejection only exposed its own poverty and guilt. Their wandering, then, is not meaningless drift. It is the painful progress of those who seek a better country. Their dwelling was poor, but their inheritance was enduring. Their condition was lowly, but their portion was above. And here the Christological center shines with peculiar brightness. The world was not worthy of them because the world was not worthy of their Lord. He too was mocked, scourged, bound, condemned, and cast outside the gate. But in His rejection lay the exposure of the world, and in His death the overthrow of its power. The rejected stone became the cornerstone, and all who are united to Him inherit not only His life, but also the pattern of His reproach. Rejection by the world is not proof of divine displeasure. In union with Christ, it may be one of the clearest marks that a man belongs to another kingdom. Reflections for today. The modern church is deeply prone to measuring faith by the wrong rule. We are drawn to what can be seen: growth, influence, ease, applause, immediate success. We easily assume that if God is near, the path will open, the burden will lighten, and obedience will be rewarded in ways this world can recognize. Hebrews 11 verse 35b-38 overturns that instinct. Some of the truest saints are not the most celebrated in the eyes of the age, but those who remain faithful when fidelity strips them of comfort, reputation, and earthly advantage. There are modern forms of apolutrosis, release, still offered to believers. Not torture racks, but subtler bargains. Silence the truth and keep your acceptance. Blur your convictions and keep your place. Dilute obedience and preserve your comfort. In every generation, the world extends its own counterfeit deliverance, not salvation, but escape from reproach, exclusion, and loss. And often the real question before the Christian is not, can I escape? But, what must be surrendered in order to escape? These saints perceived what such relief would cost, set it beside the better resurrection, and refused it. That refusal was not born of native greatness, but of faith wrought by grace to esteem the promise of God above present ease. This passage also speaks to those whose suffering is not dramatic enough to be called martyrdom, yet sharp enough to weary the soul. The sting of mockery in the workplace, the narrowing pressure of social estrangement, the slow forfeiture of advancement, approval, or friendship because you would not bend. These afflictions are seldom recorded on earth. But Hebrews does not require public notice in order to render heaven's verdict, of whom the world was not worthy, was spoken over saints hidden in caves, unknown to history, but known to God. The Lord who counted them precious has not changed. And for those whose endurance is thinning, who have walked a long road of obscurity, reproach, or inward exhaustion, this passage offers more than a summons to try harder. It offers stronger consolation. What sustains the saints is not the strength of their grasp upon Christ, but the strength of his grasp upon them. The new covenant does not merely set a better hope before us. It gives us a better mediator who ever lives to intercede for his people. The one who purchased the better resurrection also supplies present succor. He does not merely command endurance, he ministers it. So then, your obscurity is not evidence of desertion. Your costly obedience is not lost. Your hidden faithfulness is not unnoticed. The God who saw those wandering saints still sees his people in their deserts, caves, and lonely places of reproach. And because Christ is your high priest, your standing before God does not rise and fall with your present sensible strength. It rests outside yourself, in the Son who has entered the true sanctuary on your behalf. You are known above. You are kept by grace, and you are on your way home. Conclusion. Hebrews 11 verse 35b to 38 takes us beyond the bright edge of miracle into the deep places where faith is proved by endurance. Saving faith can refuse temporal deliverance, endure violent suffering, and outlive the world's rejection because it is anchored in a better resurrection and a better country. These saints lost comfort, liberty, reputation, and life itself, yet they were not overcome, because they had laid hold of something death itself could not touch. And this is where the passage brings us finally to Christ, the true faithful sufferer, who refused the easier path, endured mockery and scourging, was condemned and cast outside the gate. The world was not worthy of him either. Yet through his rejection he secured our acceptance. Through his death he destroyed the tyranny of death, and through his resurrection he opened the better resurrection to all who belong to him. The call of this text is not merely to admire the martyrs, but to cling by faith to their Lord, who now intercedes for his pilgrim people and will not fail to bring them home. So let the heart be established, not in itself, but in him. Let present ease be weighed against eternal glory. Let the favor of Christ make the favor of the world appear a small thing. For the faithful may be rejected here, but they are received above. They may wander now, but they do not wander alone. Their great high priest has gone before them. Their better portion is secure in him, and their home is sure. Amen.